posterity.
Lord, we thank you for this time and the freedom to come together and to worship you and learning your word and studying it. See what you have to say to us, Lord. We just thank you for talking to us in that manner. I just pray that you will speak through Lynn and you'll use Lynn to bring us to the conclusion that you would have us with this word, Lord, and just pray that you will be with all the prayer concerns and mentioned and non-mentioned, and just pray that you will on hand and bring your provision to those that need it. Thank you and praise you for sending your son to die for us, Lord, and in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
And thank you, Lord.
I had one person email me, Ron and Linda will not be here today. They are still under the weather and asked us to continue to pray for them to get back to full recovery mode. So if you could lift up both Ron and Linda this week, that would be much appreciated. They hope to be back with us next week. Okay. All right, if you want to go ahead and turn to the book of Hosea, we are going through chapter 1 today. The goal is to do one chapter per week. I try not to smile when I say that. If you guys will read ahead, that would be a great assistance because you can formulate any questions or things that are not clear to you. And then we can, if I didn't cover them in the notes, we can go over them in the discussion time and I can answer your questions, or I can just make up some wild answer off the top of my head and see if I can snow everybody. Oh, Paul's joined us. Hey, Paul, how are you?
I'm going to get my book.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to go through each verse in clumps, and I'm reading out of the New King James Version. I already did the introduction, so I hope you were able to, if you didn't see that live, you were able to view it on YouTube, so you have kind of an idea of the who, what, when, where, why background. Some of that material we'll go over today just because the text demands it, but overall, as we go through verse by verse, I've got like 3 or 4 thoughts at the end at your main message that I just thought about this week as I went through chapter 1. So here we go. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea the son of Beeri in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam the son of Joash, king of Israel. So this is our opening statement in verse 1. And this is the sum total of what we know about Hosea, which is only to say we know nothing about Hosea's background other than he started his ministry as a young man. He was one of the longest lived prophets in terms of his professional career of over 50 plus years. And his dad's name was Beeri. And that's about all we know about him. His name, as we mentioned last week, means salvation. You'll also see the other versions of it in the words Joshua and Jesus. Nowhere else in the Bible is Hosea mentioned. He's not referenced anywhere else in the Bible. So as we went through last week, his ministry area was in this northern kingdom of Israel. Israel had a civil war, and now you have the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Hosea was located in the northern kingdom. And the reason we know this, by the way, is when you'll see it when we go through chapter 7 and verse 5, but he actually calls the king of Israel our king in a possessive sense. So in his ministry, as you'll see, is primarily focused in the northern kingdom of Israel and its capital city of Samaria. Now, for the benefit of his readers and to reference his time frame, Hosea indicates the kings of Judah as well. Again, he's not ministering in that kingdom, but he's giving a time reference for when the kings of Judah were ruling. Remember, with the 50-year time span, he covered an awful lot of kings. And then, of course, his king, which is King Jeroboam II. Now, we do know a lot of things about Jeroboam II. I may go off on a slight historical diversion, with which Tony would have enjoyed. I don't know if anybody else will or not, but Jeroboam II was an interesting fellow. Jeroboam, he was actually not a good king in the sense of godliness, but he was a good king in terms of professionally and economically. He was able to go through a long period where the northern kingdom of Israel was actually quite prosperous, and they were basically at peace during this period of time. So the kingdom itself was prosperous from an economic and a political standpoint. But he was not, and I emphasize, he was not a godly king. Actually, during this time of financial and economic and political prosperity, there was significant, as I indicated last week, spiritual and moral decline, which Jeroboam II was one of the chief reasons behind. People trusted in their things and their idols and not in God. And I don't know if that sounds familiar to you these days, but the terrible result of the decay of their morality and their spiritual maturity wouldn't become evident until Jeroboam II goes out of the picture. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that later. Now, we know this historically because after Jeroboam II's reign was over, he had his boy took over. And I'll mention this later. His boy lasted maybe 6 months and he was assassinated. As a matter of fact, the 6 kings that followed Jeroboam, 4 of the 6 were overthrown violently, and the 5th was conquered and sent to exile in Assyria, where he died. So we're getting at the cusp at the end of Jeroboam II, where literally not only spiritually, morally, but politically and economically, everything will begin to fall apart for the northern kingdom of Israel. Let's go on to verse 2. This is the one Steve talked about a little bit last week, and I will give you the various versions that you can pick from, chocolate, vanilla, and tutti frutti. Here we go, verse 2. When the Lord began to speak by Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go, take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord." So this is Hosea's commission, if you will. This is the beginning part of his prophetic ministry. In the original language, it reads just like it does in our English versions. Now, I'm always quick to point out when that is not the case, but this is the case. It really does say, "Go take yourself a wife of harlotry." So when you're reading this, and just the simple take on it is, this is exactly what God has commanded him to do. Now, that word for Hosea, whether it's a woman of idolatry currently, or she has a heart of idolatry, and God's letting Hosea know the way this is going to go down, either way, this could not have been an easy command for Hosea. Now, just think of it. You're starting out, you're brand new, you're all revved up, you're all fired up for God. God, what do you want me to do? I'm going to be your prophet. What's your first thing you want to tell me? And this is what you get told. He was told to take a prostitute for a wife. And the reason why is also given in our text, because Israel has committed great idolatry, great harlotry, great prostitution by departing from the Lord and going after false gods, idols. Through his command to Hosea, God brings to life this consistent picture that's actually used throughout the Old Testament to describe Israel when they'd fallen away from God. The Lord is the husband, Israel is the spouse, and Israel throughout its history has had this chronic attraction for idols, like the lust of an adulterer. And so God's people were as unfaithful as a prostitute was. So we can see that this picture that God is using literally through the prophet Hosea and his family scene, we see how idolatry and rejection of the Lord feels to God. Now, how does that apply to us? I don't think Ned's got some little gold trinket little, oh, wait a minute, I got something I can use. I don't think Ned's got one of these and he's like bowing and praying to it every day and worshiping it and giving it the praise and the honor and the glory. But do you think we have idols today? Do you think that we have things that we put ahead of God, which is idolatry? When we put anything in front of the Lord, let's look at, see, God is painting us a picture here. Maybe you've never thought of it this way, but God is saying, this hurts me just as if you had a wife who was unfaithful to you. If you were the victim of an adulterous marriage, how would you think that feels to you? And yet God is using this illustration to describe himself in Israel. But let's not forget the himself part. By commanding Hosea to take a wife of harlotry, God will put Hosea in the place where he actually feels what God feels. And guess what? It doesn't feel good. When we cheat on God, when we put other things ahead of God, I don't know if you've ever thought of that, you hurt God. You in a sense, you hurt his feelings. He has feelings, obviously. Where do you think we got our feelings from? From him. Now, a lot of the commentators and scholars had comments about this, and one of the ones that I wanted to read you was from James Boyce. He said, we can't say that God grieves exactly like we grieve for the simple reason that he controls all things and will always work them out in accordance with his own good pleasure. Nonetheless, there is a parallel that God has chosen to draw between his feelings in this situation and ours. So I just want to kind of like, that's a first mic drop. That's just to think about that we hurt God and we hurt him every time we put something ahead of him. After everything he's done for us, we're the unfaithful spouse. Okay, the controversy in verse 2 is pretty obvious. It reads what it reads, and it just doesn't sound like God. I mean, and scholars are about 50-50 on this. There is no clear-cut answer. There are three possibilities. Let me dispense with the one that has almost no credence whatsoever. A very small few, think that this whole story in Hosea is metaphorical. It didn't really happen. It's a story. So, all right, not to try to get too far in the weeds. When you study the Bible, one of the things that you have to do before you approach a book is look at the literary genre it belongs to. Is it autobiographical? Is it historical? Is it apocryphal? You know, what is it? Is it mytho-history? What is it that we're studying, first of all? And that tells you, can you take this literally word for word or not? Or is this some kind of a story for an illustration? Now, in this case, from a literary standpoint, Hosea is clearly a narrative, historical, autobiographical book. There's nothing about it that lends any credence to this metaphorical approach. Now, it gets them off the hook for God telling him to do something that doesn't seem like something God would tell somebody to do, but it simply doesn't follow any form of correct textual criticism. So this one I'm going to just dispense with. Most scholars believe, whether they believe the one way or the other of these next two ways, most all believe this was an actual event that occurred. All right, here's the two other approaches. She really was a harlot, or she had the heart of a harlot, wasn't a harlot yet, but would later become a harlot. In both cases, Hosea knows what's going to happen. So don't miss that part. It isn't like Hosea is later surprised because she had the heart of a harlot and she later became a harlot. No, he knows from the get-go exactly how this is going to go down. Now, a lot of scholars, about half of them, press this idea that Gomer, his wife, wasn't currently a prostitute when Hosea first met her. This would make them feel better about God commanding someone to do something that just doesn't sound like something God would do. So that this is how they explain it away. She had a heart of idolatry and only became one later. Now, that may be the case, but in the plain, simple, and I always teach you guys, usually the best reading of the text is the plain, simple reading of the text. And the plain, simple of the reading of the text makes it sound like she's already a harlot. Now, in support of this group believes that Leviticus 21:7 commands not to marry someone of this type. The only problem with Leviticus 21:7 is those are instructions to the priests, the priest of the Levitical order. Hosea is not a priest, guys. The office of prophet and the office of priest were two different things. So I really don't think Leviticus 21:7 has direct application to Hosea. Now, here's the flip side. She really was a harlot, and this really does sound crazy that God is telling him to marry a prostitute. And here's this young godly man, Hosea, who's going to commit his whole life in ministry to God, and he's being told to do this, and it just sounds crazy. It doesn't sound like anything God would do. Well, time out. Let me give you an illustration I thought about this week. Let's say you're Abraham, and you've waited so long for the very promised son, and you finally get him, and his name's Isaac. And God tells you, I want you to take Isaac up to the top of this mountain, lay him down on the altar, and sacrifice him to me as an offering. Now, do you think God is into child sacrifice? Oh, but Lynn, he provided a ram at the last second. He didn't really mean for Isaac to go through with it. I mean, Abraham to go through with it. Let me ask you a question. Did Abraham know that? No, Abraham believed lock, stock, and barrel that that's what God told him to do. So there are other instances in the Bible where God instructs people to do something that just doesn't seem right, that doesn't seem correct. This is one of them. So you can pick your poison, which one you want to believe in. Those are the two, but it really isn't germane to our study because Hosea knew whether she was a harlot or she was going to become one, he knew this was coming. This was obvious to him. And the other thing that I have to say is and this is in defense of theory that she wasn't a harlot yet, is if you look at go take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry. Now, I'll explain that in a minute, but this is clearly future tense. He doesn't have kids yet. He doesn't even have a wife yet. So this future tense that she isn't a harlot yet and may become a harlot later, they use this as another supporting reason why they believe that, because the statement clearly has a future tense aspect to it when it talks about the children of harlotry. All right, let's move on to verse 3 and 5. So he did what he said, he did what he was told to do. He went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Notice what that says, because I'm going to point that out very specifically. She conceived and bore him, speaking of Hosea, a son. Pretty clear, right? It's not a children of harlotry there, unless you're thinking, well, she's a harlot, so she has a child and they're a child of harlotry, but just hang on. Then the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel, for in a little while I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu and bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. Here's your first prophecy. It shall come to pass in that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. I do have to give you some historical context, because that's not going to make any sense to anybody reading this just off the cuff. So he takes Gomer as his wife. I will come back to this, but what an incredible level of obedience that Hosea had to go and just follow this very first command. And so she has a son by him, and they call his name Jezreel. So Jezreel kind of means two things. First of all, the literal word means scattered. And so this is a prophetic inclination. What's going to happen to the nation of Israel? Assyria is going to come in, conquer them, and scatter them to the four corners of the earth. There will be no more nation of Israel any longer. Okay, so his name is going to be a constant reminder to Hosea and anybody listening of a prophecy that's going to happen to Israel. Second, Jezreel refers to a specific valley in Israel. It's the valley of Jezreel. Now, what's significant about the valley of Jezreel? When you had this split between the northern and the southern kingdom, there's a man. He was not in lineage here. He was a general by the name of Jehu. And God said, there's a wicked king called Ahab. And Jehu, I want you to wipe out the entire family of Ahab. And Jehu, if you follow me the rest of your life, now listen to this, listen to the promise that's made to Jehu. I will bless you and your family and your dynasty just as I agreed to bless David's, if you will only stay true to me. How about that for a promise? So Jehu goes and does what God says initially and wipes out Ahab and his whole lineage. But then he takes it too far. He kills a lot of innocent, massacres a lot of innocent people. And also he killed one of the kings of Judah, which he was not supposed to do. And then in order to appease the people and keep them from traveling down to Jerusalem on the high holy days, he started erecting high places and temples of worship in and around Samaria and northern Israel, so that people wouldn't be tempted to go back down to Judah and the southern kingdom. Did he follow God? No. So God now pronounces judgment on Jehu and everybody associated with him, the house of Jehu, and he says, I'm going to bring an end to it because you didn't do what I said to do. And so this young man's name, Jezreel, will be a reminder of that for all time. God's going to avenge the blood spilled in the valley of Jezreel. Now, this was obviously not good news to Jeroboam II, the current king of the northern kingdom where Hosea was located. It basically said that his dynasty is going to come to an end. In fact, we know this from historical records. After Jeroboam II died, he died in 752 BC. His son, Zechariah, no relation to the prophet, his son Zechariah came and took the throne and reigned 6 months, and he was assassinated. And guess what? That ended the whole lineage, the whole line of Jehu. That was the end of the house of Jehu. And he also says prophetically, and I'm going to bring it into the house of Israel. Just as the house of Jehu would fall, so would the whole kingdom of Israel. We already said in the introduction, Hosea would live to see the day when that prophetic pronouncement was fulfilled, was finished. We see that Israel was defeated, destroyed, and taken captive by the emperor Sennacherib and the mighty Assyrian Empire, and we're no more. And then lastly, says we're going to break the bow of Israel. Now, some of you guys who've been with me for a while know what that means. The bow was the main instrument of warfare then. It was a symbol of power. So a broken bow symbolizes that Israel's going to lose all of its military strength, all of its military power. All right, verse 6 and 7. Going back to Gomer. So these two prophecies we will see fulfilled in this book. All right. Next, Gomer goes, and now look at the wording. She conceived again and bore a daughter. Doesn't say necessarily that Hosea was the dad, though. Then God said to him, to Hosea, call her name Lo Ruhamah. Lo Ruhamah, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. Yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah, will save them by the Lord their God, and not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, nor by horses, nor by horsemen. And this, again, this is a prophecy that we won't see fulfilled in this book, but historically, I will give you some pictures of it. If you want to read this story, it's in 2 Kings 19, somewhere in that area. He says, call her name Lo Ruhamah. Now, Lo Ruhamah literally means no mercy or not known. So this child's unfortunate name would always remind Hosea and his listeners of coming judgment, coming exile, and coming dismissal from God. It also, if you named your child not known, it raises the question whether this child really knew her real father, who her real biological father is. A lot of the scholars feel like this raises the specter of doubt on this child. Now, by the time we get to the third child, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. He said, God continues though, yet I'll have mercy on the house of Judah. What a cool story. I don't have time to go through it, but if you want to read 2 Kings 19, after the army of Assyria, at the end of Hosea's ministry, the Assyrian army conquers the northern kingdom and destroys them, and they're scattered. Now, the king of Assyria was not finished. Sennacherib had plans to go south, invade Judah, and destroy them. So he encamps and encircles the city of Jerusalem, which was a walled city, and they're going to make a siege around it and basically starve them out. I don't know if you guys remember this story. And so the people inside prayed. The king prayed. Everyone prayed to God to save them, to help them, because really it all looked lost. They were hopelessly outnumbered by the Assyrian army. And everybody went to bed that night, including the Assyrian army in their camps. And this just gives me goosebumps. In the night, one angel of the Lord. If this doesn't blow you away as the power of an angel, one angel of the Lord went through the Assyrian camp and killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one evening. And they got up the next day and their whole military was devastated. They tucked tail, they went back, and they never bothered Judah again. Now, who relied on the bow? They didn't. They relied on the Lord their God. So why did God spare Judah and not spare Israel? Because Israel had nothing to do with God. Israel did this. You're going to see this with what he names his third child. But Judah, not consistently, but off and on, Judah was very good about godly kings and godly leadership and leaning on God. And this is why God spared them. You could read about that, and King Hezekiah is a great example of that in 2 Kings 18, if you want to get that backstory. But Judah had godly kings. So that's one of the reasons that God chose to spare them. All right, I have 8 and 9, and then we'll take a break. Now, when she had weaned, lo, Ruhamah, she conceived and bore another son. So we had a son, a daughter, and now another son. Then God said, call his name Lo Ami. And what is, for you are not my people, God says, and I will not be your God. That is a horrible statement for God to tell you. The name Lo Ami literally means not mine or not my people. That's what it literally means. So this third child's unfortunate name was a constant reminder to Hosea and everybody else that listened to him that the people of Israel had pushed away the Lord God and should no longer be considered his people. This wasn't so much as a sentence or a penalty as it was simply a statement of fact. It wasn't like the people really wanted to belong to God and he pushed them away and rejected them and he wouldn't have them. No. This was the people of God, the Israel rejected God. And here the Lord simply recognizes that as fact. So there, and also if you have a child that you call not mine, that's what his name literally means, then I suspect, and most scholars agree, that by the time you get to the first child was his, the second one we're not really sure about. And by the time you get to the third child, this was a child of prostitution, a child of one of her adulterous situations. And what's cool is we will see consistently Hosea not only taking his wife back and loving her, but treating all three kids as if they're his own. So we'll go through that in your main messages. But what a remarkable person Hosea is. I'm just stunned with him and his character. All right, we have about a minute. We're going to go to break, and we get back in about if you pop back on in about a minute or two. We only have 2 more verses, and we'll be done with the first chapter, and then I'll have some parting thoughts. So I'll see you back here in just a couple of minutes.